So you were at Lisbon Web Summit this past week.
Yes, Paul. So it was a really great event. The main stage was, of course, dedicated to AI, but sustainability still played a significant role because a lot of the concerns were about policy and regulation. We're currently facing a wave of deregulation. So that was the main topic, how to navigate those setbacks. This had a big impact on the funding landscape for a lot of innovation and technology startups within the climate space. Funding has gone missing.
Yeah. How are some of these companies thinking about their emissions and their supply chain? And, if emissions are such a concern, what are they talking about and how are they talking about it?
Yeah, so look, the situation is a company has 3 emission scopes, right? Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. And Scope 3 are the supply chain emissions. And that's basically all you have on your emissions portfolio, right? So those 3 scopes. If you allow offsetting, right, you're basically trying to or claim that you're reducing emissions, but those offsets have no bearing on your Scope 3 portfolio, right? It's completely outside the supply chain. So the question is, well, why is it allowed in the first place to do offsetting? Well, you may argue there are not enough good projects that allow you to reduce emissions within a supply chain, right?
One thing we've often thought about is that offsets have been well-meaning, but they've largely allowed companies to avoid looking internally at their own business or at their own supply chain. And sort of when you start to track in detail sort of where emissions are coming from, supply chain emissions, Scope 3 emissions are actually a sizable proportion. And being able to address that head on is a challenge. And unfortunately, offsetting has sort of, we've avoided it to date. And what you're saying there is absolutely sort of aligned with it. So it sounds like the frustrations that people were articulating at the Web Summit, but also sort of our broader understanding of the market as a whole, that there might be an opportunity for a practice like insetting on sort of in supply chain focused reductions. And this is definitely our focus. And I'm curious how people reacted to that when you spoke about insetting at this conference.
Yeah, that was actually really insightful because I approached a lot of people to talk about the state of sustainability. When they asked me, what do you do? I say, yeah, well, we're creating a market for insetting. And they're like, what is insetting? So it is fair to say that insetting is very new. It's basically what offsetting does, but you just make sure that those reductions remain within the supply chain.
But that's the crucial point, is that it's in supply chain of reduction, sort of for existing business processes. I think that's changing. Like, maybe in a sort of a prior decades, companies would be challenged to find solutions to their own emissions. But now there's an increasing range of solutions for every facet from raw material sourcing to your own electricity to thinking about what suppliers do as well. And so it sounds like that's increasingly not true. That there's no other way. That's shifted. So when you started to explain the concept of insetting to people at the conference, how did they react to it? Aside from saying we don't know about it or this is new, like when you go through it, what's the response?
Yeah, that's a great question, because I think the biggest challenge that I heard is lack of business case, right? So there's just a big disconnect between capital, whether from an investment perspective or from a revenue perspective, and tying that to sustainability initiatives. That's the biggest thing that companies struggle with, right? And then when I was talking to them and I was explaining them the concept of insetting and how that can create revenue for them and or their clients, their eyes opened up and said, like, hey, we have to partner on this, right?
Nice. But so one challenge is like certification. Like companies that are starting to think about this, starting to think about supply chain emissions, or any sort of action. Like sometimes certification can be costly and or it takes a lot of time. Like being able to innovate on that piece is also important too.
The credibility of certifications itself is, let's say, diminishing, right? There have also been a lot of discussion of allowing offset credits of all sorts to be accounted to Scope 3 reductions. And Currently, it takes months to certify a certain practice. The reality is there are hundreds, if not thousands, of incremental improvements that you can do on a factory, in a data center, anywhere in the industry, right? You can do those, and they lead to better efficiency, emission reductions, right? They're small incremental improvements, but they can have a significant impact, right?
Sure.
And the current situation is very few companies are capitalizing on it, right? I think what a lot of companies are looking for is business cases. What kind of value do you provide to your clients? Honestly, I haven't heard that many good responses, apart from giving them data or insights or a nice user interface for them to see the results, of course. But how can you tie progress and sustainability within your company or within your supply chain to your bottom line, which is profits, right?
Yeah.
If that link isn't there, or if that link isn't strong, I'm sorry, there's not much progress that's going to be made, right? Another question, which is, well, how many emission reductions expressed in tons of CO2 are you reducing for your clients, right? If that's a number they can provide, then why are you not generating value out of that for your clients?
Interesting.
Because if you reduce 100,000 tons of CO2 for a client, there are other organizations within the supply chain who could be interested in those Scope 3 emission reductions, right?
Yeah.
Because currently,
we can benefit.
Yes. So currently the situation is a company decarbonizes, sets up solar panels, its Scope 1 emissions go down. Scope 1 or Scope 2 emissions go down, right? But it also means that all the supply chain partners get that benefit within their Scope 3 for free, right? And free isn't really a long-term business model, right?
Fair enough. But it's also that like these emissions reductions may only be a certain quantity or size, but if there's additional support or investment or engagement from others within the supply chain, it might be much larger, and that would allow for much greater benefit across the whole supply chain.
Yes, exactly, right. And I think this is where insetting or a concept like inset credits can provide co-financing, right? So you can say, look, we want to set up a green facility to generate green electricity for our factory, right? And that's going to cut down our emissions by, let's say, 10% or something like that. One organization may not be able to pull it off, right? So especially in manufacturing, where you have a lot of low margin businesses, right? Maybe for them to make an upfront investment is not feasible, and a bank may not give them the loan for that as well. And even if they did, right, what's the business case there?
Got it.
You see?
Yeah.
But if 4 organizations within that supply chain can I say, look, you're currently very polluting, but we want to co-invest, right? We can help you set up a more sustainable operation. We're willing to co-invest, and the benefit there for us is it's going to reduce our Scope 3 emissions, right? Because those organizations may be under pressure to reduce their Scope 3s.
Yep.
It's a way of actively reducing or tackling their Scope 3 emissions, right? You can go to your supply chain partners and say, look, decarbonize, or we stop doing business with you. We see this happening with large organizations, like Amazon, for instance. But on the other hand, you can also go to your supply chain partner and say, look, we love doing business with you. What can we do to help you be more sustainable, right? And if that requires putting up some money in there, so be it, as long as they get something in return, right? What they get in return is maybe a share of those emission reduction credits, which they can claim themselves, they can trade it, they can use it as an investment.
Interesting. So just to take a step back, so rather than this traditional solution of offsets that are unrelated to your business, what you're talking about with insetting is within supply chain collaboration and investment, upstream or downstream. Maybe these projects may not have been fundable before, but with an inset credit, in exchange for the investment, there could be a clear allocation of emissions reduction. And so that there's this kind of collaborative investment element to it, and sort of like emissions reductions closer to, your own business, rather than a project that's completely unrelated and you have no idea what they're doing, kind of thing.
You're completely spot on right there. To get to net zero, right, you can read whatever report you want. It requires trillions of annual investments. If you boil that down to a single organization, that could mean millions or billions. And it's not that some organizations don't have the money. They have the money. But what do they get out of it, right?
Yeah.
Like I said, if you keep treating sustainability as a goodwill effort, it's not going to last long. It's not going to be sustainable. There needs to be an economic outcome, right?
Well, that's a good segue into maybe the next piece, which is you sort of touched briefly on the carbon-3 solution as being a inset marketplace. So it's not just simply that there's the supply chain investment and credit retiring, but maybe also credit trading as well. One of the key challenges you highlighted before is sort of saying that, like, what's in it for them? Historically, sustainability efforts have been values driven, or maybe they've been marketing driven, or just sort of a broad umbrella of, we want to, we think that this, our end customers will like this. But it's often seen as a cost center within sort of a P&L for a business, that sort of, we just need to do this as part of the cost of doing business. What we're trying to think through is, what if there's a way that this isn't a cost center, but it's could actually have a financial return instead? And so as we start to talk about credits and sort of exchange of investment for emissions, or sort of tying emissions reductions to investments, these can be valuable within a supply chain for those parties that directly want to claim Scope 3 reductions and make sure that that's published in a sustainability report, or for their compliance reports wherever they're at in the world. But maybe there's also an opportunity for other parties that see this kind of tokenized credit, sort of tying emissions and investment, and say that this is actually a really interesting financial asset on its own, and it might be worth more to somebody else, or it might appreciate in value over the time when the price of carbon changes, or as some of these projects get off the ground and they're really high quality. Maybe this next level to what we can do around this to supercharge insetting even more is to have it be in kind of a marketplace kind of solution that's making things tradable and potentially getting a return on investment.
If, for instance, one organization does co-invest in a decarbonization project of one of its partners, it can do that early stage, right? It can perhaps pre-purchase some of those inset credits that will be unlocked in the future, right? Like a futures contract. And it can do that for a much cheaper price, because there's still a risk that the project hasn't come to fruition. There are no emission reductions being done yet, so it's still like it's a forward promise, right? But nothing prevents you or an organization from making that kind of investment if you're willing to take the risk and you say, look, I'm betting that this project will be successful by next year or 2 years from now, so I'm going to buy those credits beforehand, like a pre-purchase, for a much cheaper price, right? If you can buy inset credits for a lower price, you can hold on to them. It provides liquidity, it provides capital to execute the project, and that's really important, right? And then eventually, let's say your risk plays out really well, the project comes into fruition, those inset credits are now available. Let's say the inset credits are now available. You can go ahead, either claim them yourself, right? Those are really cheap insets that you can deduct from your Scope 3 portfolio, or you can sell it to someone else within your supply chain, right? And you can make a profit out of it, right? You can sell them for 3 times as more if
there's a willing buyer for it. Yeah,
exactly.
So this sounds like the virtuous cycle that we want to try to achieve is focus on key emissions, one, connect those emissions to your partners who could be co-investors, two, and then as those investments are tied to those emissions reductions, either book them for your own use within the supply chain, or see if there are other parties that would be interested in trading this as a way to get even more capital and more investment in these projects. This is adding this element of trading, but also sort of like these projects are vetted in a way that's not too cumbersome.
So we talked about certification and certificates, how long and expensive that process is, right? So and a lot of opportunities for improvement, right? Especially now with the amazing tools that AI can provide to simplify and speed up setting up baselines, validating results, gathering data, analyzing data, right? A lot of that stuff can be done in a matter of minutes by an AI system, right? It doesn't need to take months anymore. It doesn't have to cost 100,000 euros anymore, right?
Overcoming that hurdle sounds like it's another key challenge, and if that can be simplified, that'd be fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, I was even thinking like that could be like even a side product for C3, right?
Yeah, sort of
Just certified faster.
streamlining. Yeah,
Yeah,
well, that's interesting. It sounds like one of the key challenges is this like incremental improvements that to date, maybe a lot of these projects have been these like really big things that required a lot of development, planning, timelines, but that actually there's a bunch of activities that can be done that if there was just a more streamlined and simple way to do it, it would just be able to incrementally sort of knock through that really quickly.
I fully agree, right? So this is a little bit of the challenge that we are facing now is how can we do that, and especially how can we do that in our current political landscape, right? With a lot of deregulation.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, the changing regulatory landscape will affect how companies think about the priorities, and maybe it calls to attention a need for simpler, faster solutions for those that want to do it and can also sort of be more engaged in it. And maybe this is something where kind of market or marketplace-based approaches might be valuable.
Also, another great example is companies in the EU can use, for instance, inset credits as a mechanism to incentivize and co-finance decarbonization efforts with their suppliers outside the EU, right?
Interesting.
It's providing a carrots, as the saying goes. We have many more sticks than we have carrots. That's a bit of the issue, right?
That's a great one.
So,
so that's sort of like creating this incentive structure to actually address these existing emissions is absolutely a huge priority.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, it was great chatting as well. Take care.